Hello, everybody. Adam Parks here with another episode of Receivables Podcast. Today, I'm here with an industry legend and somebody that you all will recognize if you've been to a conference in the last 15 years or so, Mr. John McNamara. How you doing today, John?
Great. With an introduction like that, Adam, if I ever get famous, you have a spot in my entourage.
Fantastic. I look forward to that.
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking me to participate.
Absolutely. Look, it's been a long time coming for us to be able to have one of these conversations, and I'm really excited for that opportunity. But for anybody in our audience who has not been as lucky as me to become your friend through the years, can you tell everyone a little about yourself and how you got to the seat that you're in today?
Yeah. Wow. It's a little bit of a story. So I started as a collector out of college in 1983 when Ronald Reagan was president, with a company called American Creditors Bureau. Kind of rose through the ranks, was an executive with those guys. Stayed with them right at 20 years. Then I worked for URS for a while, again, executive role. A chief operating officer at Asset Management Outsourcing was and then right before the Great Recession, had the bright idea to start an agency with a friend of mine, Brett Crandall. And we co-founded Fidelis Recovery Solutions. We were doing okay, but it wasn't growing fast enough and it wasn't throwing off enough cash for both of us. So we agreed one of us would get a day job while the other one ran the business. We thought that Brett would go get the day job. And about that time, I met the guys at LiveVox, and I became a free evangelist for them. And they called me looking for a chief marketing officer. I said, I'm your guy. So I went from being a debt collector to being a marketing guy overnight, and worked for them for about 6 years. And then we grew. We were having fun. We were growing fast. I think that's when I became I guess that would have been my second startup. I became addicted to startups. I really like that. Like the vibe. I almost like the sort of the terror of a startup, right? Because you've always got to be clicking. Anyway, so I'm at LiveVox. We're doing well. And I get a call from my friend John Tonetti from the CFPB. And if you know John Tonetti, you'll absolutely know this is completely on brand. Tonetti calls me and says, John, the CFPB wants to talk to you. And then he just went dead silent. And I mean, I'm panicked. I'm thinking, wait a minute, we are a large market participant. We're a servicer for large market participants for a number of them. And then I did a mental inventory of every egregious thing I'd done since kindergarten. And then finally, I'm sure it was only 5 seconds, but it felt like a minute. Tonetti sort of goes, no. He goes, John, I'm leaving the CFPB. My kid's going to college. I'm going back to work for a large bank. I need to make more money. You would be ideal for this role. And then I think I almost collapsed with relief. At the time, I knew the CFPB was going to create Reg F, and they were the implementing rule for the FDCPA. And the bug was planted. Okay. And I thought, wow, this sounds really exciting, but I had equity in the Fidelis Recovery Solutions. I had some equity in LiveVox. So I kept my eye on the position. And then around January of 2014, LiveVox was purchased by Golden Gate Capital. I had sold the rest of my equity in Fidelis to Dennis Cunningham. And so I actually went home and I said to my wife, I said, what do you think about giving myself a 6-figure pay cut and then moving to a higher cost of living city? And she's like, do it. Because I think listen, loved LiveVox, Louis Summey, Larry, Joe Gelbard, all those guys. Nothing against them. It's just I wanted something different. And I was worried. I was worried about our industry. So anyway, in January, put my hat in the ring, and it took like 6 months before they finally hired me. I came in to work on Reg F, and that's where I spent maybe the first 3 years. Almost all of my time was giving a market perspective about how industry really works there. And then I was going to leave after Reg F came out, and it took longer than anticipated. And then I kept getting promoted. So every time I thought I was going to leave, I got promoted. And finally, I'm the principal assistant director of markets, running pretty much everything but mortgage and small business lending. And loving the smart people I'm working with and the fact that we actually can be a voice of responsible industry. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important that regulators get it right by knowing how things actually work. But we were infused with a lot of humility too. While we knew a lot about how industry operated, and I know a lot about collections, I'm aware of the fact I don't know everything. And so you would see the markets people use their networks to sort of ping people and say, is this really a thing? Or how do you operate here? So did that, and then I was about ready to retire in September, actually this time last year. I was going to go ahead and pull the plug and retire because I could. And I really thought Kamala Harris would win the elections. Rohit would stick around for a few more years. I didn't want to be part of that bureau. I just felt like Rohit did not listen to experts like he should, and I was tired of it. So I was pretty much reconciled to retiring. And then when Trump won, I got calls from multiple staff members going, John, don't retire, stick around. Please help with the transition to a Republican administration. They knew I had good contacts on the other side of the aisle, and they knew I'd help with that transition during Trump won. So I thought, okay, I'll stick around. And so I talked to transition team. I was talking to all the likely suspects, making sure that they knew how important the markets group was, that the markets group was not hyper woke. They weren't radicalized. These are basically fairly humble former industry players and really good analysts that know that not only they either know how markets operates, private sector operates, or they're curious enough to want to know and they're willing to listen. So working at that, I thought we were headed towards a transition to have somebody like a Kathy Kraninger. Probably the Bureau, I think, would have taken a significant cut, maybe 20 or 30%. I just felt that. And then they wound up firing everybody.
Mhm.
It's like, holy crap. Like what is going on? So my informed opinion is that there was a faction at the White House that was kind of Kraninger-like, policymakers, kind of your sort of traditional, but you also had sort of a more radical faction that really wanted to get rid of the Bureau, which I think that thinking is absolutely misaligned with how responsible industry wants things.
Agreed.
All the way from small collectors all the way up to the biggest banks don't want a no bureau thing because we know the states go crazy. Not just blue states. Red states are more populous now, and they're likely to do some things. And listen, nothing against the states. It's just they don't have the time and the budgets to do the kind of deliberative, informed rulemaking that a federal regulator does.
No, and it creates a terrible situation of a patchwork across the United States where you can't have even treatment. And like a credit score in Massachusetts and a credit score in Florida needs to be weighed the same way, or I'm not going to use that to make credit decisions. And now you got to send me all your pay stubs.
No, absolutely. And that's terrifying. So anyway, things are going along. The Thursday before Easter, I start getting emails and calls from staff who are being fired. Like by the end of the day, Jason Brown, who was the head of research, and I were both in the building. And, Jason comes over to my office about 7 o'clock. That's when supposedly everybody that was going to be fired was fired. And Jason goes, John, were you fired? I said, no. I said, what about you? He goes, no. We both looked at each other and said, shit. I mean, like we were left over and we didn't necessarily want to be because it was just too crazy. As it turned out, of the 1,700 people, 1,500 have been fired. Actually perished. By really awesome senior deputy and I were the two people in markets out of, at the time, maybe 40 that weren't fired. It was at that point that I just thought, can't do this. So that was when I decided to leave for good. But on the way out, I tried to talk to, I think, some very reasonable politicals who were actually on the ground inside the building. Mark Calabria, Joe Gamello, Ellie Greenbaum, and make sure they knew that regulations, research, and markets were very, very professional, sort of fact-based, fact-driven policy and rulemakers. And I think I was pretty good at that. But I'm not even sure as things turn out whether they'll run things. So at the time, I had 3 different offers to do other stuff, and all kind of interesting, and from good companies, good people. And then I've been following my friend Joe Gelbard from the LiveVox days, who founded this company called Avtal. So Joe calls me about the time that I decided to pull the plug and I was weighing the other offers and says, John, we got a nice round of funding. I can afford you if you'll take a pay cut. I'm like, I didn't even ask him what the pay was. I said, I'm in because I'm at a point in my career, once again, where I can take a pay cut. Who cares? I can do something that's fun and exciting. And again, once again, I'm at a startup. And I will tell you this, Adam, the Bureau was a startup when I got there too. And people that thought I would describe it as a stodgy, stuck in the mud, Department of Transportation, bureaucracy. It wasn't that at all. Richard Cordray was the director then. We could do things pretty fast. And I think if you've got the ability to do things fast, you have the obligation to do things right, which means highly informed. So it was fun. It was a startup so then here I am in another startup.
So what motivated you to stay in the space overall? I know that this is where your career path has been. This it's all about the people, and you've been seeing the same people at the same conferences in the same cities for 20 years. But like when you hit that point of like, okay, I'm ready to retire. What is it that kind of you almost got out? What brought you back in?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Okay, so I talked to my first debtor in October of 1983. His first name was Romeo. I will not reveal his last name. It was a Macy's account for $234. It took me 3 days to get the guy on the phone because we were manually
Hmm.
dialing literally like this. And I read my script to him, and Romeo responded to my script by saying, "I laugh at you, you stupid asshole." And then he hung up. And that actually said, "I laugh at you, you stupid asshole." He did laugh. And then he hung up. I gotta quit. This is a tough business. But even then I realized getting people on the phone was hard.
Hmm.
And we consumers never want to hear from us. We're always even legal calls are unwanted calls. So
Hmm.
even then I thought there's got to be a better way. So at Liveox, we had outbound bursting that allowed for it making it easier to get consumers on the phone. I used to joke with folks that at Liveox we could provision so many outbound lines that once a year we got Jimmy Hoffa on the phone, and about every other year we got Amelia Earhart's crazy ass on the phone because we could basically blast out so many lines, and that helped with the sort of the declining ability to use voice.
Hmm.
So during Reg F, we watched New York State enact their collection rule, and it clearly envisioned digital. But then it broke my heart because it made the hurdle to get into digital so high that nobody was using it. And then when we issued the Sabrifa for Reg F, like we heard from industry that said, you guys didn't talk enough about digital. And so we went back to the drawing board and we really, really wanted to make sure that we could create an environment that would steer in modern technologies to communicate with debtors. And so we did. And I'm kind of proud of what Reg F did is trying to bring some clarity to the market. And it did. So we saw this gradual adoption of digital. We still had TCPA out there. We still had some ambiguity out there and still a lot of caution. And then so while I'm still at the Bureau, I swear debt collectors don't know they want to do this now, but at some point they're going to want to hug Senator Warren and Mark Zuckerberg. Senator Warren for Reg F. I know they'll be conflicted about that. And then Mark Zuckerberg for the SCOTUS Facebook case that basically created a tier of digital of SMS and other messages that allowed for sort of this entry to full digital communication.
Hmm.
Anyway, Joe Joe Gelbart, his company, I'm listening to him as he's building the company out, and I liked what it was because it was three basic things and nothing more. And that is SMS and email working together with a payment portal that's frictionless, intuitive, and easy for the consumer. It's white labeled to whatever agency or entity is using it. I thought, okay, with all the hype about AI and this and that and digital, these are the three things that really like ring the cash register literally. So I thought, okay, you're onto something here because you're not trying to be something shiny, you're trying to be something useful.
Hmm.
And then what really two other things sold me. One is it was designed that if you could create a file to send to Lexus or to a dialer, you could probably create a file that could engage with the Avtal product. And then the best piece was it was success-based pricing so that the only time we recognize revenue is if money goes through that portal. So debt, and you know this, debt collectors are facing headwinds. I guess they're not headwinds anymore because they're coming at them from all directions,
Yeah.
and they're getting stronger. But I thought, gosh, the idea that you could actually help an agency lift their revenue, reduce costs without them investing or fixing themselves in cement with a legacy system is brilliant, and it's probably just what the industry needs right now. So we're seeing agencies adopt this like pretty quick. We save money. There's a model where agencies pay money per email or per SMS, whether it generates money for them or not. And I don't think that's a sustainable model. So I like what
There's
I
a
believed
lot of
in.
challenges that come into that model, like domain. Who's responsible for domain reputation management, right? Like
So
if we're just going to outbound all day long, like there's a whole other level of responsibilities that I think organizations tend to not think about.
no, you're exactly right. And that's so I'm probably the anti-sales guy for this, and I'm sure that Joe and Khaled Bitar, the CEO, they're probably cringing, but like what we do is the most boring. It's not mindless, but it's boring and it's hard work that nobody wants to do. And that is so SMS is nice and it's sexy. Payment portals are nice and sexy. Email's not sexy, but that's where the hard work is done. That's why that's a great astute question, Adam. Is the hard work is warming up and maintaining and monitoring the reputation of this email domains.
Hmm.
And that's really where the magic of Avtal is. And it's something that no real agency, even a big one, should build out because that's infrastructure. That's something that's
I
never
can
going to
tell
give
you
you a
that most
competitive advantage.
organizations don't understand it. Most of
Yeah,
the
no,
IT
no.
departments don't have DNS expertise. I mean, I'm managing DNS for hundreds of sites.
So you know what at the bureau, I have an analog at the bureau. The hard thing about the debt collection rulemaking is everybody has a debt collection story. I mean, so when we're trying to do the
There's a lot of anecdotes out there.
Yeah, exactly. Like every meeting on policy when it came to Reg F, somebody that was outside the rulemaking team, run by the very apt, very competent, wonderful Kristen McPartland at the time, but every day it's something new about these freaking debt collectors. They're doing this. Now that was a headline by a suspect outlet, but everybody they can relate to debt collections because they've either experienced it themselves or know somebody.
Mhm.
Email's even worse, right? Everybody thinks they're an expert on email. Everybody thinks they're an expert on text. And what I found in my gosh, I'm not even 2 months in the new gig, Adam, but what I found is sort of three types of agencies. There are sort of the digitally naive. They don't have a digital presence. We represent a free digital presence for them. That's cool. At the other end, we have the digital sophisticated that are pretty good at it. And what I tell them is we represent a free A/B test bed or a free challenger to your own thinking about the efficacy of your digital efforts. But the
Mhm.
big middle is the email, the digital spurned. They're convinced it doesn't work. And that's where we go in and start working with them and say, let's take a look at the reputation of your domains.
Mhm. That's where it
It's
always
so easy.
starts.
Yeah, I mean, and when Google dropped the spam threshold to 0.3%,
Mhm.
like a lot of people, that was what, a year ago, they got knocked out. So that is the hard thing. And I can tell you well, I'm old, but I think I'm young at heart. I mean, I've got about every fintech app you can think of on my phone. A lot of people operate out at home just like they do at work. They operate largely out of their inbox. If you can get the emails into the inbox, you get engagement that parallels, rivals SMS engagement if it works well. And if you've got SMS and email working together with a really easy to navigate payment portal, I mean, that's where consumers want to be. And again, I talk to advocates all the time in my old role.
Mhm.
Um, in their mind, all calls are unwanted calls, and if it's unwanted, it's illegal. You and I know that's not true.
Mhm.
Your call may be unwanted, but it's still legal. And most, from responsible industry, that is the case with all the phone calls. But the fact they're unwanted tells you that consumers want to engage asynchronously via digital. And I told you I'm old. I'm 66. I'll be 67 in October. But I've had the same credit union since 1989. I've only talked to them twice. I mean, they're great
But
people,
look, a lot of
but they
consumers are going the route of they're borrowing the money digitally. They want to communicate digitally. And as you look at the age brackets or even just cultural differentiation, you can really see how different subsets of groups. My wife and I communicate totally differently. She's all WhatsApp and she's texting voicemails back and forth with her friends. I haven't listened to a voicemail since 1996. So like it's just there's a different approach to these. Now, I have an interesting question for you though, because we talk a lot about you're talking about getting the people into the channels, and I think that's absolutely the first step is getting these agencies and debt buyers and organizations into these digital channels so that they are communicating on the channel. But now the next question starts to become, where's that differentiator? 3 to 5 years from now, the channel isn't the differentiator. It's going to be your strategy and your content. So building out those content libraries, ensuring not am I sending the right message on the right channel right now, but am I sending the right message content to the right person at the right time? And I think that's where the differentiators in strategy become separators between organizations in the next.
No, I could not agree with you more. And then the other wonderful thing about servicing, and that's what we're all doing. I mean,
Mhm.
my worldview is collections has always been just extended servicing, right? It's part of the same chain. When you service, you collect all sorts of helpful data along the line that lends itself initially to data-driven decisioning, but also AI decisioning down the line about how they work together. And I'll tell you what, the other thing that you just triggered something else. What appeals to me about Avtal is like I met Ohad Samet, who founded True Accord very early, and I loved the model. I love what he was doing because he's as a rookie collector at 83 under Reagan. When I talked to Romeo and he hung up on me without hearing me out, it hit me. Collections is a marketing problem with a little bit of sales. You're taking somebody like Romeo who doesn't want to talk to anybody about his Macy's account, but you're trying to elevate his energy level or his level to engage. And any raise in that level is success. So even him hanging up on me was a success because I had way more information than I did before. So when Ohad was building out True Accord, treating it as a marketing challenge, that's the first time I heard anybody that talked about collections the way I did. That you're trying to create an environment where the consumer is getting enough impressions, they feel like they're comfortable and they want to engage with you somehow.
Mhm.
Whether it's a letter, I mean, even a letter that tells you to F off is a level of engagement and you know something more about that consumer. So digital is that. And again, the more the data that you have, the more you're able to work with those templates to find the right mix at the right time. Based on the right age and type of portfolio, all that comes together to really optimize that. And then I think eventually, like not now, but eventually, I think people want to engage in app, and
App,
that's hard.
I think there's some level of app, but I'm more of a proponent of the web-based application rather than having the localized app because I always have struggled with the idea of a consumer wanting to add a debt collector's app to their phone.
Yeah, no, that is a crazy hard challenge
From a
because
privacy perspective, I can see some interesting challenges, but you bring up something really interesting here when you talk about, every communication is a success because you're collecting information, you're collecting these signals and you're compiling signals to create intelligence to predict next behavioral action is kind of your objective. And as I've started really playing with that over the last year or so, I've been spending hundreds and hundreds of hours of prompt engineering and just trying to understand how to dissect some of this data. I'm curious, as somebody who was, intimately involved with Reg F, and there was really, artificial intelligence was a pipe dream as you were going through that process. How well do you think we are positioned going forward with the rule set that we have now as compared to the technology available? And I equate it back to looking at FDCPA in the 70s, right? By the 90s, it was very different. And that time block was 20 years. But Reg F was only not 5 years ago, not even. And so the technology is moving at such a faster pace. How do you think that plays out over the coming decade?
yeah, no, it's a good question. So we had a battle cry on the Reg F rulemaking team. And the team, great people, awesome attorneys with a couple of PhD economists. And at first it was me, and then Gandhi Aswaramurthy, the senior program manager that I hired, he eventually replaced me as I got promoted up. The battle cry was there will be no telegram in this rule. And if you recall the
That's
FDCPA,
awesome.
it's a very short
That's
statute.
awesome.
Is it? As a matter of fact, I might have a copy of it here. I do. So, Adam,
The first time I read it, I thought to myself, I can't believe that we had to write this down.
yeah, no. So we wanted to make it, but it was a good reminder to us that we wanted to make this technology agnostic
Mhm.
so the rule would stand the test of time. By the way, side note, I went out to industry one time and I was talking to somebody who I overheard somebody who didn't know me. And they said, yeah, I just got back from a visit with the Bureau. It was a bunch of children with a copy of a blue book and one old guy. I was the old guy. But
I think I've been in
so
that room.
yeah. So in any case, you're kind of making me replay the rule. Phone calls could almost sound anachronistic at some time. And
Mhm.
I think there was some gnashing of teeth and rending of clothes over the 7x7 initially, but I think most collectors are kind of like, yeah, we've got cell phone numbers and we have place of business numbers. We don't necessarily need to call the same number 8 times a day.
No, but data providers had to improve the quality of the data that they were selling. I'm really
Yeah,
glad that they didn't really get sucked in under this data broker rule and that didn't move forward because it felt like there was some pretty serious unintended consequences that were going to come from that because it would restrict the ability to maintain and to communicate 7 and
yeah,
7.
and we did know that like a 7 by 7 rule would cause collectors to stop using all the possible phone numbers
Mhm.
for the debtor, and they would use the two best that they had, which would be the cell phone number and the work number. And I think that's worked out pretty well. I mean, so to date, I've heard no one like I think the rule. You're going to drive me to reread it, but I don't. I think it's very technology agnostic. Digital sort of talks about digital broadly enough that it encompasses sort of communications, personal message within apps like LinkedIn, Facebook. I think that's spot on. The AI thing, I'm flashing back to my early days. Like when I joined LiveOps, cloud was scary. Like I had to
But that's
convince.
exactly my point. When you went through rulemaking, the level of artificial intelligence that I'm going to use to process this podcast is significantly stronger than anything that was available when you wrote that rule. I'm just
Yeah, and
curious because I know the rule. I don't know it as well as you do. You lived it. But I was just curious to get your take on whether or not there's any
well, yeah, I
restrictions that
was.
we need to be concerned with or what that looks like in the future.
Yeah, what I was getting at is early days of cloud, there was so much hype and everything was cloud based. And there wasn't that much cloud early on. Now cloud is just infrastructure.
Mhm.
I'm going to sound like a curmudgeon, and I am on some things. AI is on its way to being infrastructure, where it's just
Mm.
there. It's less scary when it's infrastructure. For collectors, the thing about AI I worry about the most is just data governance, where they begin sort of collecting data willy nilly and they don't really know the provenance of the data or whether they were supposed to have it.
How many layers of the model are there? What's the privacy impact statements look like? I've done a couple of in-depth episodes talking about that data security challenge.
Yeah, I mean, well, and the other thing is, I think most collectors are going to be disappointed by AI because maybe they're expecting it too much where their employee talks to the debtor. I mean, AI is going to be contract review, preparing for RFPs, churning through well, as I said, contract reviews, those sorts of things. Certainly the increasing use of AI to look at how consumers engage,
Mhm.
to find sort of better ways to do that. I think that's important and it's a great use case. I don't know how a collector gets in trouble with that.
I think the challenge here is not necessarily going to be the collector coming into trouble, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to the question. But I start looking at what happens when the consumer has a bot that answers the phone. And I have that
Yeah.
today, right? Like any call that comes into my line that I know is not a line that like you would have, for example, right? Like all
Well,
of
no,
that stuff goes into a bot before it ever comes near me.
this gets back to digital engagement. Again, one thing that made this attractive to me is when it comes to voice. I mean, I think iOS 26, which is due out this fall, everybody with an iPhone that upgrades to it, it'll answer their phone with,
Mhm.
a voice. And, they might be apocryphal, but I've heard a few tales from collectors where their collector is talking to the consumer's bot. So if you owe any debts, I'd hate to be
It's
a
called
collector trying to.
RoboKiller. I have it on
Yeah,
my phone right
exactly.
now. It won the FTC call blocking challenge. I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. So I bought a copy of it and I've been using it
Yeah.
ever since.
And one of the better ways to deal with phone fraud is to create a bot that will actually engage the fraudster and make them think
That's
it's
what
a juicy
RoboKiller
target
does.
and literally soak up all the resources. I mean,
That's exactly
the
what it
fraud,
does.
yeah. I mean, and
You'll
it'll
have a
make the
whole
fraudsters.
conversation with them, and because I had taught the bot that I was a scuba diver, it would talk about I'm on the water right now, and you hear the water in the background. And it was unfortunately one of my friends from the industry whose call, because the numbers it's crowdsourcing for determining the quality of a call. So it's based
Yeah,
on how many people are receiving it and marking it.
the first time I heard like an answer to fraud that got me hopeful was it was in an email context where you basically had a bot that would engage every fraud email and tie up the resources. So then you're forcing the fraudsters to be like the rest of us and work hard for their money.
And build
But
infrastructure.
yeah, exactly. So, that's good. But also when I see what's in the marketplace right now, it's just like cloud. And it's just like the early days of blockchain where it's overhyped.
Mhm.
as being useful everywhere, when in fact it's not useful everywhere. And so there's a reason Gartner has a hype cycle. And I think
I
there's so many people that are headed for the trough of despair.
Well, I look at artificial intelligence and I see 6 use cases for the debt collection industry specifically. Like here are the 6 that I think are most impactful. And then there's plenty that are general business, the contract reviews, HR applications, accounting applications, or just general business applications in general. So I think it'll be interesting to see how people start to move towards that type of technology. But as we looked at what FDCPA originally was and how the technology changed over that 20-year period, and now we get clarity on the rules within 5 years, there's a whole other layer of technology starting to come out faster. I mean, at an exponential curve. I look at the AI growth right now, similar to the growth of data storage, which since 2008, with the invent of the iPhone, has been on an exponential growth curve that no one could have ever predicted.
So one thing I'd urge listeners that are agency folks, so I think back in 1990, I bought a Zenith luggable computer and took it on the road with me as a regional
Luggable. I
VP.
like that phrase.
It it
Luggable.
it it had an 8088 processor,
Mhm.
8088. But I was able to write reports faster, include some graphics when I was doing office audits and reviews. But I wanted to embrace that early technology because I wanted to know what the frontier of possibilities, the possibility frontier was. Everybody needs to be playing with and using AI to know, to get a sense of the frontier of the possibilities.
Mhm.
And that's something they can do right now. And quite frankly, it can be helpful. I'm on a panel next Wednesday in New York City with Kelly Cochran, who was the head of Regs to Bureau, and Richard Cordray. And I mean, the first thing I did is Gemini. I said, Gemini, tell me everything that Richard Cordray has ever said about open banking and Dodd-Frank Section 1033. That's my weekend reading.
John,
But
I literally went and bought an Android. I'm an Apple guy through and through. I went and bought an Android just to be able to use native Gemini and to be testing these tool sets on their native iOS.
nice. That is nice. But I think people need to engage there. They need to understand the Gartner hype cycle to understand that
Mhm.
it's, listen, when you get disappointed by your plans for AI to get rid of all your collectors, you got plenty of company. Literally every technology coming down the pike goes through this hype cycle. So be ready for that. Oh, but one thing, and this is where, like, using coding and developing, like, that's a game changer because it used to be that you tried to buy this system of record that did everything. And I think what people are realizing now is if they can distill down the system of record to what it really needs to do, and typically it's to count money
Source of
and make
truth.
sure.
You need a single source of truth.
Exactly. And it's got to be something that clients rely on. The balance is 10,500. It links up, it syncs up, it reconciles. Once you've got that, you can plug and play about any cool stuff you want without literally cementing your feet in the ground. I
Mhm.
mean, I was an evangelist for LiveVox because I hated premise-based dialers.
Mhm.
And the fact that, you stroke a check for $2 million and buy premise-based equipment, you're locked in and your frontier of possibilities just got reined in. If you've got a system of record basic thing that does the money, then you're ready and nimble for whatever comes down the pike.
Mhm.
And even in the bank world, I think they're using, I want to say Jack Henry has products that create an abstraction of the underlying system of record that allows all kinds of cool stuff to be done.
Mhm.
Staying nimble to see where AI plays out. And quite frankly, you need to do it anyway for the sake of compliance.
If your system of record is not interconnected to the best possible use cases for each new technology channel that's coming out, you're on the wrong system of record, because the days of wholly capturing an agency to only using my product, I think, is long over, because the AI race has just begun. And this is
Yeah.
just
And
we're in the first steps of a marathon.
no, exactly. That's exactly right. So it's almost like instead of a highly complex system of record, you almost want something simple that does the minimum amount that you need, but they do it well. They do it rock solid.
That's it.
And that provider has no desire to be the troll under the bridge when you
Mhm.
want to use anybody else. You need to plug and play.
John, you're gonna laugh. We created a marketing campaign for Latitude that was literally the AI hub. Here's how we sit at the center of all the best use cases, instead of going out and trying to be the developer of every type of AI technology out there, and to you're never going to be the best at everything. It's just like when you talk to an agency. If you talk to an agency and they say that they're the best at every product, you already know that they're not telling you the truth, right? They might be the
You know
best
what?
at auto files between 7 and 9,000.
Everybody, I think, well, not everybody, but most people have a Swiss Army knife somewhere in their junk drawer
Mhm.
that they never use. It has a tool for everything, but they never use it because they have a specific tool for whatever it is they need to do.
Yeah, that's it.
You know,
John,
don't have that.
that's the perfect insight, John. That is the perfect insight for us to end our discussion today. I really do thank you for coming on and sharing all of your insights and your backstory and really just everything that has been happening over the last year as you were exiting the CFPB and joining back to the industry and finding something where you had a passion, which clearly you've got a passion for the marketing and the communications. It's always a lot of fun to talk to you.
Listen, if you got 2 more minutes, I
Sure.
want to put in my last plea.
Please.
If my health is good and we have a change in administration in the White House, I want to come back as a Schedule C to do one thing, and that is to urge the new Democratic appointed director to not feel like he or she needs to go crazy because the other folks tried to cut the bureau down to nothing. A future bureau, if they fire down to 200 people, the only way to restaff that is with politicals and with fellows, which means you sort of doomed the CFPB to this constant cycle of being way left, way right, way deregulatory, overly prescriptive regulatory. No responsible industry can operate in an environment like that. The only one who wins are the folks who don't want to operate responsibly and the scammers.
John, I agree wholeheartedly with all of that. The political pendulum continues to swing, and the harder it swings, the worse it is for the consumer.
Great.
Wow.
Hey, listen, I
I
can't
really
thank you enough for having me.
I appreciate your insights, John. Clearly, we're going to have to continue this conversation again. For those of you that are watching, if you have additional questions you'd like to ask John or myself, you can leave those in the comments on LinkedIn and YouTube, and we'll be responding to those. Or if you have additional topics you'd like to see us discuss, you can leave those in the comments below as well. And I'm willing to bet I can get John back here at least one more time to help me continue to create great content for a great industry. But on a personal note, John, this was a long time coming. You are one of the very few guests that I've really wanted to interview for many years, and we just weren't able to put it together. Now that we have that opportunity, I look forward to continuing the discussion.
Absolutely. I'll come back. And while I was at the Bureau, Adam, I would have been a lot, probably less candid.
It would have been a little bit more prescripted. I saw you on stage a lot, but it was always great to have an opportunity to engage with you. You know, everybody watching today, thank you so much for your time and attention. We'll see y'all again soon. Bye.
Take care.